Let's take a question from the audience if we have one. If we have one here, you're going to have to stand up.
Way in the back.
Well,
Oh, there's one.
and we'll have to repeat it, I think.
Okay. In our modern world, how do you explain beauty looking at the fashion ideal model these days, being very skinny, slender? What has that to do with beauty?
The question is that we're talking about voluptuous nymphs and Indian art and all of that, but the ideal model, especially these days, is a slightly anorexic looking, ultra slim. Now, maybe that's not true anymore, but it used to be true 10, 15 years ago. I'm not an expert at models, you can see, but the more skinny look. And how do you explain the trends and oscillations of fashion in the appearances of models? And again, what I'm getting at is trying to look at universal principles such as the voluptuous nymphs and all of that, but it doesn't mean that, okay, it raises an interesting question. To what extent does culture play a role in art? And I've been talking about universal principles. Does this mean that there are no cultural influences? Obviously there are, and what was pointed out just now is that there are cultural trends and ramifications of culture which I've not even begun to address, not to emphasize that, not to imply that these don't play an important role. And that's why even fashion design varies from period to period. I mean, what I'm wearing is probably out of fashion. What you're wearing is a epitome of sartorial splendor. Yeah, but it's a very good question. Yes.
Dr. Ramachandran, I was wondering about two questions. One, what's your most pressing question in your research today, and in neuroscience? And two, what is maybe an alternate question that you hope to answer kind of one day that motivates you?
So what's the question we're interested in right now, and what's the ultimate question?
Exactly.
Okay, the question we're interested in right now, we're looking at mirror neurons. These are neurons in the brain that will fire. Everybody knows there are sensory neurons. If somebody touches you, there's a sensory touch neuron that fires in the brain. Okay? But there are some neurons which will also fire when you move your hand. These are motor command neurons. So there's one neuron for picking up a peanut, another neuron for pulling a lever, another neuron for pushing something. And that's common knowledge. These are called motor command neurons. But subset of these neurons will fire even when you watch somebody else reaching for a peanut. And the same neuron that fired when you reach for a peanut will fire when you watch somebody reaching for a peanut. So these are called monkey see, monkey do neurons. When you're doing a virtual reality simulation of what's going on in the other person's head, you're taking the other person's vantage, the neuron is taking the other person's vantage point and looking at that peanut. Right? So now they've been discovered for motor and for sensory as well. The neurons will fire when somebody touches you. It will also fire when I watch you being touched. So these are sort of empathy neurons. But the question is, how are these wired up? How do they evolve? And what role do they play in things like empathy, and reading somebody else's mind? So these are the questions we're interested in. For example, one of the things we find is, my student Laura Case and I have found that, so you've got these neurons which will fire when I watch somebody being touched, when I watch Roman being touched, or when I'm touched. So how does the neuron know? So if I watch you being touched, why don't I actually feel it being touched? Okay, I know you're being touched. I know what it feels like to be touched. And I empathize. But I don't really feel my, somebody pokes you with a needle, I don't say, ow. Right? Why is that? How does the neuron know the difference? Well, it turns out my skin is going back and telling the brain, don't worry, you're not being touched, so there's a null signal. But Roman is being touched, we know what it's like. Pain feels like, a touch feels like. So you get empathy without literally dissolving the barrier between you and me. But if I anesthetize my arm and make it numb, somebody touches you, guess what happens? I feel you being touched. I just look at you being touched and I feel it, and I say, ow! Okay? So this merely anesthetizing my arm makes the mirror neuron think that I'm being touched. It dissolves the barrier between you and other people. So I call these neurons Gandhi neurons. It's the mainstay of all Eastern philosophy that there's no real barrier between you and other people. It's just the skin which gets in the way. So it's like your mirror neurons are connecting everybody in the world. It's like Facebook or any of these social networks. Evolution has already designed your brain for that.
I'm going to ask for a question for Roman first. Do you have a question for Roman? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the role of passion plays into your art.
I think passion has a very important role aesthetically throughout history or historically in terms of narrative. And what is the role of passion in your art?
It's I'm not sure. I think I have a certain drive to make work that I respond to and that others respond to, and that's I don't know if I would call that passion. Passion's a sort of a kind of hot and heavy word, you know, a little bit for me. So I wouldn't say that I'm not passionate about what I do, but I don't really feel like when it's not something I've really thought about. So I don't have an answer. I would just want to point out that what you just said about the Gandhi neurons, the mirror neurons, right there, I just could see how much those neurons play a role in the perception of art. And so, you know, watching movies, if you get goosebumps when something's happening, or you know, there's all kinds of these kinds of responses, I think, that happen with art. People touch each other in the movie, and you know, somehow have this sympathetic response.
Pornography.
When you're thinking of a work of art, when you're making the work of art, and after you're done with it.
Well, there's the part where I think about what I want to do, and there's the part where I'm working on it and it's becoming something, and then there's the part when I feel like it's done and I'm satisfied, and then there's the part where I share it. All of these things have their various gratifying aspects, and the process is sometimes stymied, challenged. Sometimes if a project isn't working out for me, I might just put it away and not complete it. And so there's steps along the way where I'm, I guess, excited, passionate, and then ultimately it's nice to have this kind of sharing and gratification in that.
Okay, another question.
For Dr. Ramachandran, the Hindu notion of the circularity of time, how does that work into art, and is there any relationship with the circularity to Western sense of anticipation? But I'm just wondering how, tell me about circularity in time in art.
Oh, well, I have to think about that. Well, I think one of the things, I haven't thought about that very deeply, but one of the things that strikes me as different between Western and Indian art, when I look at a great sculpture by, say, for example, Michelangelo, or say, look at David or something, often they capture a moment of time brilliantly. So there is an emphasis on realism, even in terms of time. It's this moment of time that you capture. Whereas that Shiva Nataraja, the dancing Shiva, what you're trying to portray is the nature of time itself, the cyclical nature of time itself. So that distinction might be relevant to what you're saying. But beyond that, it's a very abstract question which I haven't given much thought to. But now that you've prodded me along, I'll think about it.